What's up everybody, it's Matt from Peter Glenn, and in this video we're going to show you the different hole patterns that are standard on most of the snowboards these days. Let's check this out. Alright, so when it comes to the hole patterns on snowboards, just about any binding will fit just about any board nowadays, but there are a few bindings out there that will only fit on very, very specific boards, and it's good to know the difference, so when you go to mount your bindings or when you are buying bindings, you can make sure that you buy the right bindings for your board. But that being said, you're gonna have four main hole patterns. The 4x4/4x2, we can almost call those the same thing, but they are a little different when it comes to the bindings. Then you've got the channel system, and there's still some of the old Burton 3D patterns kicking. They have them on some of their kids' boards. So right off the bat, we're gonna start with the 4x4 hole pattern. So this one is this was kind of one of the first standard hole patterns when it came to snowboards. The 4x4 is really, really versatile. Way back in the day when you would drill your bindings right into the board, or sometimes if they had inserts, they were out really, really far towards the nose and the tail. There really was no standard, and if you were buying a specific company's board, you were probably gonna have to buy their binding as well. But then when the 4x4 hole pattern came out, pretty much 99% of the boards on the market used this 4x4 hole pattern, and it made things very, very standard, and it made it very, very easy to adjust and to get a ton of different stance options, and it really kind of revolutionized the snowboard industry. So the 4x4 is really, really easy. We basically have got 4 screws, and they're kind of equidistant apart in a square. They're all 1.5 inches apart this way and this way. And then with the discs, you mount that on there, and you've got obviously your 4 screws. And then depending on your binding, if it's a fixed heel loop binding where the heel loop does not move, you can adjust forward and backward with the slots on the discs. If you do have an adjustable heel loop binding where you can center up your foot by moving the heel loop forward and backward, the nice thing is you can actually turn this disc sideways now, and you can actually micro adjust from side to side. So the 4-hole pattern really, really, again, it kind of revolutionized the industry because it gave you a strong hold, it gave you tons of stance options, a lot of different angle options. Okay, and then from the 4x4, now you got the 4x2, and this is basically kind of where the 4x4 has evolved to. It's basically the exact same thing as the 4x4 hole pattern, except for we now have inserts in between the inserts. So your standard 4x4 hole pattern is here, and now we actually just have more options. So you still have the option to mount standard 4x4, but we're just getting more options side to side. Now these holes are still 1.5 inches here, but they're only 3/4 of an inch here. So again, we're just getting that stance option side to side. So if you do take that 4-hole disc, obviously if we turn it sideways with an adjustable heel loop binding, you can still slide the binding side to side, and you can still get micro adjustments, because not only can we slide it side to side here, we don't have to jump all the way to here. We can basically kind of go to these inserts in between. But the really nice thing is if you do have a fixed heel loop binding where the heel loop does not move and you still need to center your foot up on the board, you can keep that adjustment forward and backward, but now we only have to move 3/4 of an inch to the side instead of 1.5 inches. So you really get a lot more stance options, and this has really, really become the standard. I think there's still a couple boards out on the market, and it's mainly gonna be in maybe some kids boards or even in just some less expensive boards to help keep the price down, where they have the standard 4x4 hole pattern. But this has really become the main hole pattern in snowboarding nowadays. Now, another good thing to note about this is that there's a lot of bindings that have come out that have mini discs. And the reason they do these mini discs is it's basically taking that hole pattern, that mounting pattern, and it's actually making it a little bit smaller. And that way the binding can have a little bit more flex where you need it. It can actually help smooth out your ride and just basically make the board flex a little bit easier too. Because when you do mount your binding on your board, depending on how stiff that binding is, it actually can stiffen up the flex of your board. So you'll get some flex throughout the board, but when it gets to your binding, it can sturdy it up. So by actually making that disc smaller and really knocking down the footprint of the disc, it allows the binding to flex more and to flex a little bit more naturally. The thing about the mini disc is when they made that smaller is they actually did have to make the mounting pattern smaller. So instead of mounting on the 4-hole pattern here, the mini discs will mount on this 4x2 here. So the inserts that are right next to each other. And you do still get that adjustment side to side, but it is a good thing to note that if you do end up with a binding that has this 4x2 mini disc, it 100% needs a 4x2 to mount. All right, and then I had to break out the cutest board ever, my daughter's first snowboard. This is the only board I had that actually had a 3-hole pattern, so it'll 100% work for this video. But the 3-hole pattern, this was a thing that actually Burton came out with around the exact same time that the 4-hole pattern came out with. And it basically has a lot of the same benefits of the 4-hole pattern, where you basically are using pretty much the same size disc, but just instead of mounting with 4 screws, you are mounting with 3 screws. They basically kind of worked off of a triangle. So this is still out there. This is not something that you really need to pay too much attention to unless you are getting a Burton kids board nowadays that does not have the channel in it. Or if you do have an older Burton board, you are gonna need a disc that is 3-hole compatible. But again, you're basically going to go forward and backward on them. You cannot put these on sideways. One good thing to note about these two is if you do end up with a set of bindings that has a 4-hole disc, and you look at it, it looks like it's very close. Sometimes you can get it to almost line up, but do not mount it. It does not line up perfectly. You'll end up either messing up your bindings or messing up your board, and that can be a costly mistake. So last up, we have the channel system. So this is a pretty cool system. A lot of people think that Burton invented this and that you have to buy Burton bindings. Two biggest misconceptions. Channel's actually been around for a long time. Companies like Rev, Forum, Capita, even back in the day, they used dual channel systems. And those are basically a way to take a standard 4-hole disc and give you unlimited stance options. So good thing to note, if you do have one of those old boards, you do still need a 4x4 compatible binding. Even the 4x2 might not work because some of those inserts are actually held together with a piece that spreads them out at 4x4. So, but aside from that, Burton basically does this so you get unlimited stance options. Also, it is technically stronger than standard inserts. For you to actually rip this out of the board, you gotta pull the entire channel out of the board. So it's not exponentially stronger than standard inserts, but it is technically just a little bit stronger. So that's not an issue. The one thing that is really, really cool is obviously with that unlimited stance options, you can basically take your disc, you mount it, you can center, move it back, move it forward to center your foot up, and then you can slide it anywhere you want to get it mounted. If you do have the Union discs, they basically have got one set of holes, so you can mount it on there and then you'll center your foot up with the heel loop because all Union bindings have an adjustable heel loop. But again, most companies nowadays do make a standard disc that will fit on the channel, whether it's a disc on its own or whether it is a disc that has both the 4x2, 4x4, or the channel system on it. So then Burton actually introduced a binding that's pretty cool called the EST. You mount it on the outside, you get unlimited stance options, angles, side to side, forward and backward. You can literally fine tune this thing, get it mounted the way you want it to get mounted, and you can have a better feel for your board. When the board flexes, the binding flexes with the board, and you can feel the board a little bit better underneath your feet. So the cool thing about the EST bindings is that personally, I think they do feel better and they do ride better. A lot of the Burton riders, they pretty much all ride the EST bindings because they do get that better feel and they don't cost any more. A Burton Genesis EST costs the exact same amount as a Genesis Reflex that requires a disc. So they're not charging you more to get a better feel. They're basically just giving you an option. So hopefully that helps out a little bit. This video is obviously very, very important so you can know what bindings fit on what boards. And when it comes down to it, you can see that most companies do make discs that are compatible with multiple hole patterns. And nowadays, it's really 4x2 and channel. Those are really your two options. There will be a few of those, 4x4s maybe sprinkled in here and there. And then again, the 3D hole pattern with the, kids boards. But if you got any questions other than what we talked about in the video, definitely leave some comments down below. We're on there every single day trying to answer your questions. We want to make sure we can get you into some rad gear, but most importantly, we want to make sure it's going to fit you, it's going to fit your riding style, and we want to make sure that it's going to fit properly too. Also, make sure to like, subscribe, and definitely get that notification bell on too so you can find out when all the new videos drop. Grab yourself a new board from peterglenn.com. Grab yourself a pair of compatible bindings, mount them up, and get out and ride. Because any day riding is a good day riding. Bye.